IVM.
Development economists Lant Pritchett of Harvard and Oxford and Michael Clemens of the Center for Global Development have a very interesting, almost heartbreaking study called the Place Premium. In the Place Premium, Pritchett, Clemens, and their collaborators found that if you compare a person from Nigeria, living in Nigeria, with less than a high school education, with somebody who is equivalent in the United States, the difference in their wages is 16 times. It's an extremely powerful piece of information because it illustrates that opportunity and being in a high productivity environment can absolutely dictate and shape a young person's entire life, their destiny.
It's a result that's borne out over and over again. Pritchett also says, for example, that if you look at wealth distribution among people from Haiti, you'll find that 82% of wealthy Haitians are living in the United States. These facts underscore that whether we're working in food, manufacturing, retail, wherever, one of the most important things we can do for young people is to build up an environment around them which can give them the opportunity to do meaningful, remunerative work. As Pritchett puts it, it's not Nigerians, it's Nigeria.
The global smart protein sector is currently the leading edge of the entire food industry. The amount of excitement we see in the sector, the jobs it's creating, and the talent it's nurturing offer huge promise and opportunities for young people everywhere who are looking to make a difference. We talk all the time on Feeding 10 Billion about how countries like India have a unique role to play in this ecosystem because we have a huge and willing pool of young talent. This year, India becomes the world's youngest population with an average age of 29. Every month between 2011 and 2030, 1 million Indians are turning 18 years old. Today's topic is very near to our hearts. We think about it all the time because we're trying to nurture innovation and build an entirely new industry from scratch. We will not succeed if we do not build a talent pool which forms the lifeblood of our efforts.
The industries of the future demand a 21st century workforce, one which is equipped with the skills to succeed in a breathtakingly dynamic technology environment, which is resilient and agile to shocks like COVID-19, and which is aligned with the future. Countries like India need to build a future where planetary and human health are in sync or be left behind. And our guest today is one of the builders we need.
Shardul Dabir, GFI India's innovation specialist, is fascinated by all things food. Over the past 6 years, he has studied food through the fields of engineering, applied sciences, R&D, entrepreneurship, management, and a complementary liberal arts degree. He's a Young India Fellow from Ashoka University and has a bachelor's in food technology and management from NIFTM. Shardul also spent time as a researcher at Rutgers University in the US and was an exchange student at the University of Saskatchewan in Canada. At GFI India, Shardul works to accelerate early-stage entrepreneurship in the smart protein ecosystem and enable GFI India's team of experts in shaping the future of food. I'm Varun Deshpande, Managing Director at the Good Food Institute India.
And I'm Ramya Ramurthy, the Communication Specialist at the Good Food Institute India, and you're listening to Feeding 10 Billion. Shardul, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Ramya. Thank you so much.
Shardul, I want to start by asking you about your background as a food technologist. You've written on our blog about the paucity of real choices that many of your peers were confronted with once they graduated, and how that has led to many talented young professionals seeking opportunities outside India or beyond research. So can you talk about the kind of talent bottlenecks that could be a potential stumbling block for growing innovation in India, particularly for smart protein?
Sure. I mean, that's a very pertinent question, Ramya. And firstly, let me tell you, I'm really pumped to be on this podcast episode. I have personally found the insights from the past speakers in season 1 and also from the speakers in season 2 to be super useful. You know, I've been thinking about this sector, the food processing sector in India, since I was 17. I wrote that blog, which you referred to, and basically that blog is a culmination of, more than 8 years of me thinking about how the innovation landscape looks like when it comes to food innovation in India. That basically combines a lot of my techno-managerial background in food science research, my background as a major in liberal arts and all the lenses that I've used to look at food through that. Also, a lot of my education was food entrepreneurship, business innovation, etc. So just taking all of those together, I've been spending a lot of time thinking what would it really take to, truly innovate in this sector. And the long story short is the Indian ecosystem and the Indian food processing sector is just not mature enough yet. So let's go back to 2016. Basically, I'm a food technologist who was recently trained, about to graduate from NIFTM, which is National Institute of Food Technology, Entrepreneurship and Management, right? This institute is a brainchild of the Ministry of Food Processing Industries, Government of India. So it's a premier institute. We have all the information about food processing in India. It's a pretty expensive degree, but like hundreds of graduating peers from NIFTM and other institutes which are reputed in this sector like ICT, Mumbai, CFTRI Mysore, IFPT, Thanjavur, IIT Kharagpur, etc. I'm not very keen on taking a job in the food processing industry in India. And that is for multiple reasons. But the pay was a large factor to it. And the pay is really, really bad in this sector, right? Usually a graduate can expect to get paid anywhere between 20 to 25,000 per month, which is less than $300. So the incentive structures, the career progression that was offered to me was notoriously poor when I was comparing it to jobs of my other colleagues in IITs, IIMs, with management consultancies, finance firms, computer science firms, digital technology firms, and also even in manufacturing intensive jobs like chemicals, pharma, materials industries, etc. So I started thinking, what are the major bottlenecks that landscape looks like this? And graduates in food are presumed to be of very low quality in India. There is no unique skill set or core value that they really offer to the industry right after graduation, especially for creating value-added products, like the ones that are needed in the alternative protein or the smart protein sector. The understanding of on-ground practical insights and product development, etc., which are very important, are really missing for students. And that can only happen when students engage with entrepreneurs, with startups, with FMCG corporations, etc., along with their coursework, which was kind of missing. I feel that there is a very little correlation between the research that is done on campuses in India, whether it's by MTech students, by PhD students during their thesis work. So, for example, they might end up spending 2-3 years like optimizing a plant-based ingredient for its protein properties, right? And I've seen that happen. It's a very pertinent example. One of my colleagues did a bunch of research and did a bunch of experimentation, and then he ended up working as a production supervisor in the food processing industry. So a lot of that research work that he did was never really acted upon in the industry. So there's a mismatch between what his skills were and what the industry is offering. Again, the food processing sector and the university ecosystem are still pretty much at its infancy, right, in India. I mean, the kind of infrastructures that required, machines, tools, equipments, like extruders, protein isolation equipments, they're pretty much missing on almost all campuses and R&D centers in India. So it becomes very difficult to, create novel R&D. The focus overall in the industry and at research institutes is on bookish kind of a fundamental research, which might not end up seeing the light of the day. And the third biggest factor is a dearth of career options in ancillary players like technical consultancies, think tanks, mission-driven startups, which are focused on solving larger issues related to the future of environment and the future of food in India. Accordingly, look at startups like Beyond, Impossible, Just, and many more in the West, right? They hired a lot of food technology graduates, and these are all mission-driven startups or companies. So at the same time, what happens is you don't find a lot of relevant organizations. And GFI India is one of those very good example of organizations which are needed in an Indian ecosystem so that, impactful interventions for transforming the future of food can happen. And for one, I didn't find any of those. Neither did my friends.
Wow, thank you so much, Shardul. That's really, really well said. And you're exactly right. At GFI India, we're trying to solve for a lot of different problems within the Indian ecosystem. And that's, as you rightly said, within the broader landscape. It relates to academic infrastructure. It relates to fundamental industrial infrastructure. It relates to jobs. It relates to one particular area that's very interesting, which is technology transfer. And technology transfer is defined, of course, as literally the transfer of technology from the academic, early stage, almost lab scale environment into industry and into the market. And this crops up a lot as a key solution because the academic environment is not as well endowed. Perhaps we should look at public-private partnerships and industry-academia partnerships to tackle these bottlenecks, both in terms of investment as well as in our talent pool. So what can institutions do to help this, to increase the velocity of technology transfer? So let's say particularly with government or industry support, what are we doing to enable this? Could you speak a little bit about that?
Yeah, a very pertinent question, Varun. And I think technology transfer is one of the key solutions that we should focus on when it comes to, boosting the innovation ecosystem in India. I see this technology transfer in three different ways, right? One is a long-term and sustainable solution, which is university engagement. Even in the West, all of the companies that were founded, including a few of the famous ones, like, for example, Ethan Brown, who is the founder and CEO of one of the most successful companies in the smart protein sector, Beyond Meat, actually started a lot of work on their initial consumer research at the University of Maryland. Pat Brown, another fascinating founder of the Impossible Food, certainly used the ecosystem at Stanford University. And we obviously all know about the 250,000 pounds world's first lab-grown burger that came out of Maastricht University in Netherlands. This basically was a result of Dr. Mark Post's research grant, which later became into a company called Moza Meat. There are countless such examples in the West, right, of founders of these fascinating smart protein startups, hiring talent, using infrastructure, and building on fundamental and applied research at many of the land-grant universities in the West, like University of California, Davis, University of California, Berkeley, Harvard, Yale, Cornell, Penn State University, Rutgers University, etc., etc. Similarly, in India, food science and technology universities like SNFTM, CFTRI, and also top engineering and management schools like IIT Bombay, IIT Delhi, IIT Kharagpur, IIM Ahmedabad, IIM Lucknow can play a huge role in helping some of these early stage smart protein startups to become successful. For example, a startup named PlantMade was working on plant-based eggs, and they decided to partner up with IIT Delhi and the professors and researchers therein. And they found really good output to their research and new product development process. Similarly, multiple other entrepreneurs are working with NIFTIM, CFTRI, Institute of Chemical Technology in India. Unfortunately, in India, all of the food science and technology focused universities have been pretty much non-existent for the better part of the 20th century, We started really late. We started somewhere in 21st century. There are some notable exceptions to this, obviously, like CFTRI, ICT, and some institutes and the Indian Council of Agricultural Research. But still, largely, like when MOFPI, which is the Ministry of Food Processing Industries, decided to create two institutes, NIFTIM and IFPT, for, focusing solely on food processing sector back in, 2013, etc. That's when we really saw a lot of this ecosystem of innovation and technology transfer really shape up for food processing. If you really look at pan-India, we have more than 150 plus food technology colleges, right? And if you combine that with universities focused in biotechnology, chemical engineering, agri-tech, etc., we have a robust count of more than 400 relevant institutions across India. And obviously, a lot of knowledge is already there at IITs, NITs, Indian Institute of Sciences, which can potentially be used for all of these research problems in our sector. And all of these universities can essentially become local innovation hubs when it comes to smart protein R&D. But I'll still say that the technology transfer is pretty weak in India, especially for technology forward areas like plant-based meat, eggs, and dairy. Almost 90% of all the tech transferred in food science is not for super high value added products, right? It's usually for minimally processed foods, which, by the way, is also super important given the context of our country. But I'm pretty sure that there are certain universities, and we are mapping them, can really establish and input a lot of their expertise to cater the booming demand of, say, plant-based proteins in India. I personally was really fortunate to get an opportunity to visit University of Saskatchewan in Canada and get trained at the Rutgers University in New Jersey in the USA back in 2013 and 2016 respectively. And this was basically a great experience because I could see very well-defined structures of technology commercialization for the research being done in their lab groups. And almost all the projects which students worked in the labs involved the government, the industry, or some innovative startups as a partner. This was basically an application of academic research in real time to the problems facing their sectors. And to maintain the revenue of these labs, the equipments, the stipends of the graduates, it's a very big task. And that's why I think our technology commercialization has been really slow in India. But that is really facilitated by the private players in the West. So a lot of grants, and there is also optimum utilization of the very costly equipment that is put in these universities by professors, by, partnering with such actors. And these university centers then act as dedicated points of contact for helping drive the innovation in the area. I'm an entrepreneur in New Jersey. I come to Rutgers University. I work with a professor on proteins, and then I see how those proteins can possibly work into product development for my product. And, I'm very happy. It's a win-win situation for both of them. So, for example, 80% of my colleagues from the research group at Rutgers University have found gainful employment in the alternative protein industry, right? Whether it's companies like Just, Beyond Meat, etc., etc., and all of them are using their skills, unlike their Indian counterparts, into the sector. Further, there are a lot of MNC companies, ingredient players that are always setting up competitions, challenges, and, innovation infrastructures at these universities. Some of it is also happening now at premier institutes like NIFTM and CFTRI, and I'm really glad to see that. So, for example, what we are doing to make this happen in India, we are working with NIFTM, for example. We have an MOU with them. We are looking to set up India's first smart protein innovation lab there. And such initiatives can really kickstart a lot of problems of new product development that entrepreneurs face. We are also mapping a lot of talent requirement that would go into this sector, and the landscape of how it looks like, what are the skills that are essential to support the early stage innovation from a sci-tech and from an innovation perspective. We are currently engaging with dozens of universities and student groups with initiatives like our Smart Protein Innovation Challenge. And, this will result in setting up of a dozen of smart protein chapters in these universities where students are engaging with each other and making some of the innovation structures in the West happen also in India by, let's just say, 2021. And you obviously are already aware of the work that GFI does with ICT Mumbai and, CCMB in Hyderabad to accelerate the cultivated meat research in the country. Some of our smart protein entrepreneurs have also directly found grants from government bodies like BIRAC by cashing in the huge network and knowledge and the talent that these specific hubs for biotechnology, etc., would offer them. So that brings me to my third point, which is government bodies and public-private partnerships for, making some of this technology transfer happen. This is a truly impactful intervention. Government bodies like MOFPI, Indian Council of Agriculture Research, Department of Biotechnology, Department of Science and Technology, the Council of Scientific and Industrial Research, which is CSIR, and also bodies like BIRAC, Biotechnology Industry Research Assistant Council, are very important stakeholders when it comes to, planning for the needs of the future in food technology, in biotechnology, whether it's setting up research centers, early stage incubators, Tinker Labs, fellowships, and also help install a lot of, equipments and machinery for catalyzing the technology needed. I feel that these are the bodies which GFI India will be closely working with, and we are already working with a lot of them. So by engaging these universities, incubators, accelerators, and also educating a lot of MNCs in international countries like Canada, Singapore, and helping them collaborate with universities in India, whether it's through joint projects, whether it's through utilization of common infrastructure for product development, that is by helping set up the smart protein corridors that we talk about. Bilateral relationships between these companies are very impactful areas that we are currently working on. So I think these are few interventions that we are currently working on to help solve the technology transfer problem in India.
So Shardul, I want to rewind back to 2019. I know it's just a year back, but it feels like it's an eon, right? But 2019 was really a banner year for all protein, as we keep saying on this podcast, especially this season. And Varun likes to point out that his phone wouldn't stop ringing after the Beyond Meat IPO, for instance. Would it be fair to say that traction in our sector, in the innovation function especially, has really grown since that time? So how would you characterize the early ecosystem building that we've done in all protein in India from then to now? Are we really maturing? And what are the signs that this is happening?
Sure, Amit, that's a great question, right? And definitely, Beyond Meat IPO was really pivotal for our team, I guess, in India in terms of getting connections with the right stakeholders and their interest therein. So I officially started studying about food back in 2013, like you know. And since then, the food processing sector in itself has come a very long way when you look at the entire landscape in India. And I see that this change has only accelerated in the past 2 years since I started working at GFI India. This is because a lot of entrepreneurs, investors, value chain stakeholders, when they first came to us, including people from FMCG corporations, like veterans in the industry, they had spent a bunch of time studying the food sector in India, but they were not aware about the smart protein sector or plant-based meat, eggs, and dairy. Like I remember all our conversations, it was very difficult to tell them what the advantages of the sector are, why they should innovate therein, what are the top lines, how it would affect their profits, etc., etc. Like there's a lot of advantage if a corporation or an entrepreneur becomes an early mover in this sector. And just to convey that was a major challenge. Also, I mean, see, transforming dairy, meat, like the foods we've been consuming for millions of years as humans, into something like what our sector is offering is really unheard of. Like a lot of these people really did not know, or they had never seen these products, never heard of these products. They had never eaten anything of this sort in India before. So that's why I think there was a, communication gap between us and them. They just had no frame of reference for the immense benefits this sector could offer. Again, there were a lot of misconceptions, right? I mean, about the products itself, like who are they for? What is their relevance in the Indian market? What kind of technology would go into making them, etc., etc. But I'm really glad to say this, Ramya, like with hundreds of entrepreneurs, investors, people from the corporates, we've been engaging these stakeholders for the past couple of years. And now the scenario looks very, very different when we talk about, say, July 2020. And I think this is also a result of the shifting global landscape in the sector altogether. Like back in 2018, I remember that presentation we used to do. There were a bunch of, like probably a dozen startups, who were truly pioneering innovation in this sector. But now when you look at it, just in a matter of 2 to 3 years, there are more than 600 startups in this space. And they're creating tons of products, concepts, solutions, technologies, services for, people across the value chain, whether it's ingredients, whether it's specific equipments. And this is throughout, right? Plant-based meat, cultivated meat, fermented meat, eggs and dairy, all of it. The Beyond IPO, like you mentioned, definitely was a great boost to the sector. And also like companies like Impossible, Just, all of them are now present across hundreds of geographies. And they have multiple products. Like they are present in thousands of retail stores, QSR chains. And that has just made access for these products more visible. Like a lot of Indians have traveled abroad, they've traveled to Singapore, they've tried these products, and they've actually tasted it. Like food is inherently a very personal concept for people, right? Until they hold it in their hands, they try it, they smell it, they taste it, they're not really convinced of what this transformation is really all about. Like if you've been following the news, every other week, some alternative protein startup is getting funded or, raising some money or getting some angel investment. And that's in the post-COVID world in the past 4 or 5 months. So I would say this change is definitely accelerating. So I would say like GFI India was largely an educator for the industry back in 2018, 2019, when we first started our office here. And in those 2 years, we built a ton of activation energy in these stakeholders. And now we are playing the role of kind of executors of these grand plan of smart protein, the mission for smart protein, by working on multiple strategic partnerships for product development, whether it's basically setting strategic incubators or accelerators focused on smart proteins, whether it's establishing innovation centers or working groups in these universities or corporations. We've been doing that a lot. Also, we've been educating a lot of students through workshops, hackathon, MOOCs, etc. I think these are all very positive points that has resulted in this conversation of ये plant-based meat क्या होता है shift dramatically. Entrepreneurs, investors, they used to ask this all the time. Is this vegan? Is this vegan meat? ये बनता कैसे है? Etc. etc. It was a common phrase in all of our meetings. But now all of them come to us with very, very specific asks. Like it's very nuanced at some points. They're asking for specific equipments. They're asking for specific information or connections with investors. And that is really, really delightful. I would also say that my alma mater, NIFTM, right? Hundreds of students who I had never seen write anything. We did a workshop there like a few months ago. And since then, all of their clubs, like the students in leadership positions, they have created small groups of students. They are writing blogs. They are putting in information on LinkedIn. They're connecting with a lot of entrepreneurs in this sector. We did a showcase of 6 entrepreneurs there actually. And a lot of them actually ended up hiring interns or, full-time employees from NIFTM. So that's the kind of change I'm talking about. I mean, there's still a long way to go about all of this, but talking in terms of chemistry, I think the rate of acceleration of the growth of this ecosystem is certainly exponentially growing now. And I think by 2021, we'll be in a very good spot.
All right, Shardul. So building an ecosystem from scratch is the core of our entire reason for being as an organization. We know this, right? This is something which pretty much only a central convening organization like GFI can do. So for a whole smart protein, alternative protein ecosystem to grow, we need industry, policy, science and technology. We need early stage innovation. Can you speak to the importance of that early stage innovation in an ecosystem like India? where so many pieces of this puzzle are not actually in place for that innovation to take off. So we've talked about this in the past with investors and entrepreneurs. So can you tell us from that early stage entrepreneur's point of view, what are the gaps as you know them and how do we plug them?
Yeah, absolutely, Varun. And I mean, don't even get me started on the innovation ecosystem and how an entrepreneur has to go through all the hoops in India. I mean, so much for doing ease of business in our country. But anyways, like when we compare India to economies like the US, Canada, France, Netherlands, Singapore, where, the progressive governments have really taken this sector as a key area of focus. And they've invested a lot in innovation, whether it's research at universities, whether it's just creating really nice organizations supporting the sector. I think they have very well-worked policy interventions to nurture the talent. And, they have a very forward lens to what the future of food is going to look like. And we need something similar in India. I mean, if you look at university and industry partnerships, and we already talked about it, why technology transfer is so important. So, for example, there's an organization called RISE, a research institute of Sweden, and it's a Swedish state-owned research institute, but it collaborates with multiple universities, industry partners, public sector, and they all come together to kind of focus on the synergy areas. And they are driving international competitive sustainable development and growth to their research agendas. So we need hubs of innovation, research and development like these in India as well. In India, as you know, the innovation landscape is quite fragmented. So, for example, if I'm an entrepreneur with a sound technical background, let's just say I'm a food technologist, and I want to start a company which is focusing on plant-based meat, eggs or dairy, any of those products, right? I will have to go on about building the entire innovation stack myself. That's like finding the right, maybe a co-researcher or an investor to developing my product, to leasing out a lab, to unearthing all the information about vendors and suppliers. There's not even a common database where I can access all the protein suppliers that, are supplying the ingredients in India. So our challenges at JFI India were building all of that. I mean, contract manufacturing is a really big pain. And I know it is a pain in other countries as well, like in the US or Canada. But in India, the difference is quite stark. What happens because of this is there are significant lead times when it comes to new product development. And especially this is true for non-scientific co-founders and entrepreneurs, right? And we see this all the time. People have no clue where to start about the new product development. They just have an idea that I'll start a business in this smart protein sector because it sounds sexy or it sounds cool, because there would be a lot of profits, because, those are all things which are evident now. But they still don't know where to begin. And that's why I think we really need to focus on this scientific talent problem. And Varun, to underline your point, in our sector, innovation is very technologically forward, right? Whether it's the processes or it's the scale up or it's the fundamental research that's required to create products, and replicating meat, eggs and dairy when it comes to sensory properties and, accounting for the change theory of GFI, which is taste, price and convenience, the holy trinity as we like to call it, is just genuinely harder when you compare it to other food processing products like jams, jellies, masala processing, cold pressed juices, packaged curry businesses, which the entrepreneurs in India have been doing as part of legacy businesses, etc. So this sector is essentially a manufacturing play, right, Varun? And an entrepreneur reaching to us has been facing a lot of these challenges constantly. So patient capital is required for him to actually invest in a lot of fixed assets, like the equipments that needed for R&D, for scale up and production. And investors also have to really understand that the founders are trying to innovate in a very technologically forward sector, like I said, and modify their investment hypothesis in certain cases when they're looking at this sector or the opportunities in this sector.
So Shardul, you mentioned in your blog as well, right, that food tech in India sometimes tends to sort of devolve into just food processing. And even then, it's not like we're a country that does a lot of value addition in food processing. So how do we shift the conversation, particularly in the university space, in that sort of ecosystem, towards looking at all protein and setting up the talent pool for, leveraging India as a real option and situating us in the global ecosystem as a real contributor?
Yeah, absolutely correct, Ramya. I think food technology in itself as a term is very misunderstood in India, because a lot of these media articles mention food delivery as food tech plays. So a lot of people fundamentally misunderstand what food technology or food science is. And again, like largely 80 to 85% of all the food that we process is really in an unorganized sphere. Like it's not very organized as a sector. So, the mega food parks and the food processing clusters that are coming up now are helping solve some of these problems by consolidating and pulling in a lot of infrastructure and other resources, But still, when you compare it to countries like Canada, China, and other European countries, they had set their infrastructure decades ago, and they process almost 80% of their food. So the maturity of food processing sector in itself is very, very high. We process like probably 20% of our food, even like I said, in minimal aspects like jams, jellies, sorting and grading of fruits and vegetables, namkeens and bhujiyas and all of that. So people have to really delve on the R&D aspects when they're looking at creating plant-based meat, eggs, and dairy. That's the kind of focus they don't really have right now. So I remember I used to intern in one of the large food MNCs in India as a production intern, right? And a lot of their research was just minimally improving shelf life or just adding some flavors or some cost cutting by adding some cost-effective ingredients. But that's not the kind of R&D we are looking at in this sector. So countries like Netherlands, Canada, they've been making a lot of strides in this, and we really have a lot to catch up. But when you consider the smart protein landscape in India, from an entrepreneur's perspective, just 2 years ago, there were two companies, Good Dot and Good Milk, and they were leading innovation in the plant-based meat and plant-based dairy categories respectively. But since then, we have come a long way. These are some positive points that I want to talk about now. And there are a bunch of innovators now who are working on, let's say, shami kebabs, biryani meat, mince meat, butter chicken, plant-based fish like pomfret, etc., etc. They're also working on plant-based dairy products like vegan butter or, plant-based butter, dal makhni, tofu, all of those concepts. So, they're working on clean label as well, because they understand that consumers are demanding this more and more. And they are also working on the functional properties of protein isolates. And they are working on ingredients like chickpea, like horse gram. And they want to make sure that all of this goes into the sector at large. They are also focused on B2B plays, whether it's like supplying ingredients for the sector at large globally, because, the market in India is currently limited. So some of them are setting up service platforms for engaging with all other startups, like setting up manufacturing lines by setting up extruders, pulling in the resources with other entrepreneurs. So a lot of cool stuff is really happening on ground in the past 2 years, and especially in the past 8 to 10 months. And I would say over the next 6 to 8 months, we are going to see quite a few product launches in the market as well. Long story short, I'm really glad to say this, Ramya. A lot of these entrepreneurs have really taken GFI's change theory to their heart, and now they're focusing on the local product market fit. They are creating products for flexitarians rather than just, vegans. And by the way, a lot of our efforts really went into helping them see that why the messaging of plant-based meat, eggs, and dairy works way better in terms of attracting the large flexitarian population compared to, vegan meat or eggs and dairy. They kind of understand now that the IP and research and development are hand in hand, and that's their biggest moat as a startup. Some of them are also working on creating protein from thin air. That's all happening in India, in cities like Bangalore, Mumbai, Delhi, Hyderabad, and a lot of queries are coming from tier 2 cities now for setting up such innovation. In the long run, I think I see India as a supply hub for a lot of these protein-rich ingredients and also for technical inputs, especially when it would come to cultivated meat sector, growth factors, just working on bioreactor design, etc., etc. We've done a lot of that in pharma, and I think a lot of entrepreneurs would replicate that in our sector as well. The biggest thing, Ramya, I would say though, having said all of this, is there's a shift in the mindset. People really had a fixed mindset before they kind of understood what the sector is all about, before we started working in the country as an organization, right? Now there is a focus on abundance and growth, and there's a focus on those bright spots that we were talking about. Particularly, universities are also doing a lot of work in terms of working with us to get their MOOCs updated, in terms of starting some competitions or case studies. And we'll talk more on this when we talk about I can tell you more about the India Smart Protein Innovation Challenge. And we can discuss how we are helping a lot of students get acquainted with this sector.
On that note, we'll take a short break. Please don't go anywhere. We'll be back with more on Feeding 10 Billion.
Hey everybody, welcome to another great week on the IVM Podcast Network. If you're not following us on social media, please do. We're IVM Podcast on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. We'd like to thank our sponsors this week, Paytm Money. So, a great week of shows behind us, and hope that you've been catching up on as much of it as you can. We had Abhishek Bachchan on Football Shitball. Yeah, let me say that again. Abhishek Bachchan was on Football Shitball. Did I mention Abhishek Bachchan was on Football Shitball? That was a fun episode. You should definitely check that out. Really, really deep conversation about cricket and things like that. We had Vikram Kochar on Cyrus Says talking about Z platforms and stuff like what's going on over there. On the note, Maruk had spoken to Sanjay Jha, which was again a really, really interesting conversation. On Edges and Sledges, the guys are having an interesting conversation about, well, what are favorite formats of cricket and things like that. So it's just really been a really, really awesome week on the network, and please do check things out. And with that, let's get you back to your show.
Welcome back to Feeding 10 Billion. Before we took a break, we were just talking about some of the growth in the Indian ecosystem in broader food tech, but also specifically in the smart protein or alternative protein sector. Shardul, you mentioned that we have a really important project we're undertaking this year, which we're actually in the thick of it right now at the time of recording, the Smart Protein Innovation Challenge. So could you tell us a little bit about that and actually talk a little bit about why it's necessary?
So, like I was telling, past 2 years, I would say 80% of the entrepreneurs or people who wanted to start a business in this area who came to us had one common query. Where can I find the sci-tech talent for developing products in this sector? And that just made me realize the value of my own degree, food science and technology, and also of many other degrees like biotech, agri-tech, and a lot of other applied sciences in the food science domain. So why we are doing this challenge, the India Smart Protein Innovation Challenge, is because we want to engage a lot of this talent, which is brilliant, right? At times, we have great students doing wonderful things in many other sectors, whether it's energy, whether it's sustainability, and we want to converge all of that talent to kind of start thinking about the impact they could have in their careers through our smart protein sector. So that was a major need for doing that. And we also realized through a lot of conversations with students at NIFTIM, CFTRI, ICT, some of the IITs, and even like major B schools like IIM Ahmedabad, etc., that these students are really unaware of what this sector is all about. Like I can talk about myself back in 2016 when I was applying for internships. I just knew about Just and Impossible. But that was also because I was in the US and I was at Rutgers University, and a bunch of my colleagues were probably going to apply for these companies after they graduate from their master programs. We wanted to really bring that back to India because unless there's a local talent that is ready to contribute their skills in this sector, it was going to be really difficult to find that sustainable growth that we talked about. So this challenge is very simple. It's basically a 4-month journey, right? And basically as part of this challenge, what they're going to do is take a bunch of courses, MOOCs. They're going to study a bunch of videos, market reports, scientific white papers, and collaborate with, people with complementary backgrounds as theirs. Probably food scientists will collaborate with management school students. And at the end of the day, what we're looking at is them creating a nice proposal. And they would basically pitch that to GFI and its partners. And by the way, we have a great lineup of partners, right? We have the Thought for Food Foundation based out of US. We have the ProVeg Incubator, which is one of the leading incubators in this space based out of Germany. We have CIIE, which is the entrepreneurship and development body at IIM Ahmedabad. And we have Big Idea Ventures, one of the leading alternative protein investors. We also have Omnivore, which is India's leading agri and food tech fund. We have Mistletoe. We have NX Food. NX Food is basically also supporting a lot of sustainable food businesses in Germany. We have Agni and Startup India. And we have also tied up with Brink, which is based out of Hong Kong, and again is helping accelerate a lot of smart protein startups. And finally, we also have Ankur Capital, which is looking at helping businesses who are creating solutions for the next billion. All of this was possible also because of our main organizing partner, Gastrotope. And we have a bunch of tangible outcomes for these students, right? Networking with employers who are looking for hiring interns, tangible outputs like cash prizes and certifications for their skills. And we are really excited to, get these students and their fresh perspectives in for creating solutions of our sector.
Yeah, I agree. And I think, overall, Shardul, the main thing that I want to highlight here is when we get an entire group that's as large as this, and in fact, at the time of recording, we have, I think, about 800 sign-ups for the challenge, which is really exciting. So we'll have literally hundreds upon hundreds of teams competing on these various challenge outputs. When you have this entire cohort of people who are thinking very deeply about these problems, it has, of course, great impacts on this new and exciting sector. But I think that what's even going to happen is it'll have a spillover effect into the food ecosystem, right? So a lot of these people become more viable candidates to go and work in large food corporations and take the initiative to work on the leading edge there, or even in venture capital or in other innovative organizations. Obviously, we hope that a lot of them will take the opportunity to enter our sector. But this is the kind of stuff that needs to happen on a very broad level, which is what we've been talking about throughout this episode.
Yeah, absolutely. I completely agree with you, Varun. I think if, for example, I took a bunch of webinars when I was a student about alternative proteins, the novel food processing techniques. And I ended up working at GFI India. So a small challenge, a small competition, a webinar can really amplify a lot of impact, especially in a student's life. So completely agree with you there.
So Shardul, we're nearly at a stage where we're about to close the challenge, in fact, and we've received, as Varun said, over 800 applicants. Can you share a little bit about what kind of talent we're seeing and what has really sort of surprised you in this process, and what is the sort of excitement level in the applicants, and what else can you tell us about the talent? I know it's early stages, but still.
Sure, Ramya. I mean, you're right. It's quite early since the challenge has not started yet. But I can say out of the 800 plus applicants that we have, a lot of them have distinct interests, right? A lot of them, like more than 150 people have interests in plant-based dairy. More than 200 are specifically interested in plant-based meat and seafood. A bunch of them want to create ingredients for this sector, technology solutions for this sector. And a lot of them are also obviously curious about plant-based eggs. I would say that a lot of them are coming with an impeccable academic record, whether it's their college records or whether it's their GPAs. I mean, one interesting fact is I think 55 to 60% of our applicants are currently female candidates, which just gives me a lot of hope in the transformation of the sector. We also ran the Smart Protein Campus Ambassador program, where we engaged with campus fellows across these universities, which would later result in setting up Smart Protein chapters across these universities and getting that dialogue started on these campuses. But I think theme here that really made me happy, like genuinely happy, was all of these students have testimonials, like they've found a platform now. A lot of them probably knew about the sector, but had no competition, no challenge to, show their creativity. So those kind of outputs are really making me happy out of this initiative, Ramya.
And we also, of course, have the GF Ideas India Smart Protein Innovation Community, which, put simply, that's just, a digital platform for sharing resources, ideas, and collaborative growth amongst all of these different partners, right? So one of the things that's a huge problem, and especially during COVID-19 when people are sitting at home, is they can't actually communicate with each other and collaborate with each other. So one of the things we've done is to just get people onto a common platform, right? So we saw this with the Future of Protein Summit. We talked about it in season 1, where when you get 400 plus stakeholders who are kind of interested in the space or deeply interested in the space or just curious all together, magic can happen, right? You can get funding events, you can get a lot of stuff going on. So we've seen this similarly right now. So during lockdown, just like over 4 months, we've seen growth of this online community. It's currently hosted on LinkedIn to about 400 members, and they're all sort of interacting and transacting with each other. We've hosted over, I think, about 13 webinars, and there've been thousands of total attendees. All of this is really, really interesting to me because when I started GFI India, the sector was basically nothing, right? There was just like one company in the space in India. Shardul, can you tell us what's going on in this community? What are these members seeking from each other with an eye to how an innovation ecosystem grows from scratch?
I think I was telling Ramya that a major point that these guys were asking was about sci-tech talent, right? The other big theme that emerged from a lot of incoming queries by entrepreneurs or by other value chain stakeholders was that they want to connect with each other, but they have no idea how to. So there was a big information asymmetry, which was a clear gap in the entire ecosystem, right? And bridging that gap was one of our key focuses at GFI India. And I think creation of this GF Ideas India community, by the way, GF Ideas means good food ideas, right? And we are looking for smart protein entrepreneurs, investors, researchers to come together and, transact with each other and share solutions and their network to help this sector boom. So that's what we've been focused on. And like you said, the rapid growth is kind of evident of the fact that people were really looking to connect with like-minded and mission-aligned individuals. So, for example, entrepreneurs were always looking to connect with vendors who can probably sell them certain ingredients or solutions, and students and researchers were looking to do hands-on projects at their universities. Now all of them can connect. And an example I gave you was the entrepreneurs who ended up hiring and giving up projects to a lot of students at NIFTM, right? Investors were always looking for interesting companies to form their own hypothesis. They had heard of Beyond Meat, but they were not sure what entrepreneurs they should be talking to. And I think this community has been providing a lot of them with a lot of tangible connections to, shape their thesis. We get like hundreds of queries every month, Varun. And out of them, let's just say there are like 130 plus entrepreneurs in our community right now, right? And all of them are working on plethora of ideas. Now they need CTOs, they need technical and business professionals to help them, kickstart their businesses, sometimes scale up their businesses. We have a bunch of those in our community as well. So when you combine all of this together, I think we have a great melting pot going on. A lot of them come to our webinars, our office hours. Again, we have knowledge webinars, we have Q&A sessions. We have networking sessions for these community members. They are talking with each other. They are getting their queries solved. And this has been resulting into a lot of acceleration and, catalytic growth to this ecosystem, in my opinion. I think a lot of corporations who probably do not want to take risk by entering directly into the market are also engaging with these startups, whether it's for distribution, whether, it's for having their products in their retail outlets, etc. So, GFI's global connections, our networks, insights into how the sector has grown in other markets, all of them through our resources, our white space opportunity papers, all of that has been really helping all of these stakeholders. And also, Varun, we've been doing a lot of one-on-one strategic consultancy with entrepreneurs who have really created some prototypes, who are looking to go to the next stage in their journey as entrepreneurs. And we are connecting them with all the right resources that they are really in the need of. So, it's very simple. It's just, if anybody wants to join this community, there are two simple things. You should have some sort of a background or understanding or mission alignment about the smart protein sector. And you should be able to just come up to the community and be open to helping others through whatever resources or network that you can provide. By the way, it does not have any participation costs. We are a non-profit. I'm really glad that a lot more traction is happening in this community, and hundreds of people are joining every other month.
Shardul, thanks for that. And I hope people who are listening to this podcast definitely reach out to us through all the avenues that we've mentioned here. I just want to close out by pointing out that we've focused on a lot of gaps in this episode. But if we wanted to end on a positive note, what do you think are the true advantages that the Indian ecosystem can offer that are just inherent and innate to India? And how are we building on them, and how can we build on them in the future?
Yeah, certainly. I was talking about the bright spots in our country, right? And talent is one of the biggest bright spots that I can personally look at. Being a student few years ago, I can really think of how students are perceiving about the sector, and roughly more than 10,000 students and, young professionals graduate every year with the training in food technology, just food technology. And if you combine that with applied sciences, agriculture, mechanical, chemical engineering, biotechnology, the number is even larger. NIFTM, for example, in itself churns about 400 to 500 techno managers every year. So this talent pool currently, though, is not ready to join the smart protein sector, but through our initiatives like the Smart Protein Challenge, through our workshops, through their engagement, we are very sure that in the next 2-3 years, like Varun said, they are going to be industry ready. And they have a lot of hard skills as well, right? Extrusion, protein texturization. Some of them who study agriculture and genomics understand about the plant pathology. They understand about what are the genotypes, phenotypes best suited for, the proteins that would go into new product development in this sector, etc. So I think talent is one of the biggest bright spots. I also think that just the sheer market size and the custom offerings that Indians have, food is a big culture, and there are so many products to innovate in. In the West, there's just one hero category, right? And in India, it's not the same. My colleague Dhruvi talked about a lot of market insights in one of the episodes of our podcast series, right? But that's another big bright spot, according to me. Entrepreneurs who understand the food culture of every different state, and then they create specific niche products for the customers, I think they are going to really succeed in the short to medium term. Again, the diverse source, the biodiversity of proteins and optimization of scale up at low cost are another two factors that are very positive points for India. We have very well established supply chains. We are the largest producers of tons of protein rich crops. We have cheap labor. We have capacity to reverse engineer a lot of complex technology in India with our talent. And that basically means that we can reduce costs and scale up very, very rapidly. And we can become a leading supply hub and an industry leader when it comes to ingredients for the smart protein sector across Eurasia. Perhaps I would say that, we say this constantly at GFI India, right? Varun has said that in multiple speeches. We have far less infrastructure and investment baggage in industrial animal factory farming when you compare to countries like USA or, Western countries. So India can feasibly consider leapfrogging the perils of this poorly designed food system. The point I'm trying to make here is it justifies that an ounce of prevention by rethinking our food system in advance is probably worth pounds of cure in dealing with the true cost of negative externalities on health, on economy, and on environment. And we are facing a lot of problems already when it comes to environment, water tables, etc. So there are research institutes who can work on these biodiverse crops. So these are some positive points. And I think there's just one more advantage which I'd like to add. When I see and talk with a lot of stakeholders across different geographies, our workforce is really international. We understand the trends. All of the investors, accelerators, the VCs, the entrepreneurs in this area have easy access to a lot of this scientific and business information that is currently being generated across different geographies in developed countries. We can easily take that because we don't have any problems with English. We are very international in the way we go on about innovation, etc. So I think these are some of the greatest assets of our country.
All right, Shardul. So to close out this episode, the year is 2050. How do you think we will feed all 10 billion people on this planet, including the 1.6 billion Indians by that time?
That's a great question. And I mean, I've always thought about the future of food. I've been thinking about it since I was 16, all those movies and cartoons where, like Jetsons, where you could just download burgers, print them. That really fascinated me. To answer your question, I wrote a blog in 2016, right? It was for a competition, and we were basically asked to reimagine how Indian future of food would look like. And I think Indians as a culture, as a nation, have been reinventing our food systems for a long time. So if you think about 1950s, 60s, post-independence, we had a lot of constraints on how we can feed our entire population, right? So Green Revolution and White Revolution really came in, and we ensured that we feed hundreds of millions of hungry Indians. And in 21st century, I think it's somewhat similar. India now realizes that we have to reinvent our food system. We are a self-sufficient country. We produce a lot of food. We are a top 3 producer of a lot of major crops, after USA and China. But there are, like we talked about, the massive inefficiencies in our current system, whether it's the pollution that is the result. Like I was living in Haryana, and the pollution there is a result of burning of crop residues. There are water tables are going down in states like Rajasthan and all over India. And we just have to realize that we are in a very resource constrained environment. And by 2050, 1/6 of the population in the world is going to be Indians. So what we have to do to solve that is basically focus on smart protein sector. And I am personally, obviously, certainly rooting for the smart protein future of India. And if you look at all the past indicators, we have actually, as a nation, always focused on consuming sustainable food. A lot of our culture since ancient time really focuses on that. So I think it'll be a combination of both these things, the global landscape shifting towards a more sustainable diet. At the same time, we also realizing that and going back to our roots of feeding ourselves more sustainably, it would result into a future where we have butter chicken, Rogan Josh, Anda Bhurji, all of the things which people love to eat, just made from plants or, cultivated sources or fermented sources. Yeah, so I think that's how the future of food is going to look like in 2050 in India, Varun.
Thanks so much, Shardul. We really hope all those dreams for 2050 come true. We've been asking every guest what they think that year will be like, and we can't wait to see who's actually got it right. Thank you so much for joining us for this show.
Thank you so much, Ramya. It was a pleasure speaking with you and Varun today.
As we record this episode, the global COVID-19 crisis is playing havoc with labor markets and immigration everywhere. It's entirely possible that the next decade will look completely different from the last one. India's infamous brain drain, or the flow of talent to markets like the US, Canada, and Europe, may be shut off or even reversed by force. We need to do everything we can to ensure that people have the same opportunities here in India as they would have abroad.
Globally, Indian origin innovators like Memphis Meat's founder Uma Valetti have been powering the smart protein transformation. Uma was born in Vijayawada in Andhra Pradesh and went on to be a Mayo Clinic trained cardiologist in the US before co-founding the world's first cultivated meat company. His story is similar to so many others across different sectors. It's our responsibility to give the next generation of innovators access to the same opportunities right here in India so that they can shape their destiny and build a more healthy, sustainable, and just food system. There's a lot of work to do before we get there, but if we get it right, magic will happen.
And if you want to start a company in this space or are interested in just learning more about this sector as a researcher or want to collaborate, please do reach out. You can also join our GF Ideas India Smart Protein Innovation Community on LinkedIn or follow us on social media. We are Good Food India on Twitter and the Good Food Institute India on Instagram. And we leave all those URLs as well as the LinkedIn URL in our description.
If you like this podcast, don't forget to check out other interesting podcasts on the IVM network. You can listen to us on the IVM Podcast app or ivmpodcasts.com. You can also follow us on our social media. We are at Ibmpodcasts on Twitter and Instagram. And if you want to reach out to me, I am at Varun D7 on Twitter and at Varun5 on Instagram. You can come ask me why.
And if you want to reach out to me, I'm Cryptic Caprice on Twitter and Dithering for Ambulist on Instagram. Please don't ask me why. We look forward to having you with us every week. And of course, if you'd like to be part of accelerating the future of our food system, please just get in touch. You can email us at india@gfi.org.
My name is Varun Deshpande, Managing Director at the Good Food Institute India.
And I'm Ramya Ramurthy, the Communications Specialist at the Good Food Institute India. And you have been a part of Feeding 10 Billion Season 2.
Hi, my name is Anupam Gupta. I'm B50 on Twitter. I am the host of Paisa Vaisa, the show that talks money. On my show, I speak to experts from every field of money and finance, from stock markets, equities, debt funds, credit cards, life insurance, every possible area of money and finance that you can think of. We even did an episode on cryptocurrency. I've got fantastic guests from mutual funds to personal finance experts everywhere. Robo-advisory, startups, just name it, we've got it. At Paisa Vaisa, we help you make smart decisions about money. You work hard for money. Now make your money work hard for you. New episodes out every Monday, and you can listen to my show on the IVM Podcast app or any other podcasting app that you have.
Entertainment is like food for the brain. It's a window to culture and a great way to understand the world around us. The internet has changed what it means to be an entertainer, creating new storytellers with millions of fans. It has spawned a new breed, the story-sellers, those behind the scenes creating the business for this ecosystem. They work with brands, platforms and channels who are keen to capitalize on an audience hungrier than ever for more stories. I'm Vineet Kanabar, and I have a ringside view to how stories are told and sold. On my show, I bring you creators, artists, executives and marketers for a freewheeling conversation around the business of entertainment. Tune in to Storytellers and Storysellers for personal stories, analysis and criticism every Thursdays as I talk to the brightest minds telling or selling great stories today.